I was always obsessed with the Eastern Mediterranean or the Levant. The two terms really mean the same thing. And I loved the history of the Crusades, of the Byzantine Empire, of Alexander the Great, and of Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. And I first went there in 1969 between school and university, and I really fell in love with Istanbul and Aleppo in particular, and the souk in Aleppo with its assault on all your senses, sound, sight, and feelings. And I was fascinated by the history of the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire. How did they last so long? Over 1,000 years of empire. So I began to study them and write about them. And I think there are three aspects of the Levant particularly interesting. A, it's the mixture, conflict and attraction between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. How did they all live together? What Gibbon calls the world's debate. Were they enemies or allies? And secondly, the cities, mixed cities like Aleppo and Istanbul and Alexandria and Beirut, which were never dominated by one religion until the last 50 years. And there was always a balance between Christians, Jews and Muslims. And as the poem goes, Jews, Turks and Christians different tenets hold, but all one God worship, namely gold. And I think the secret, or a secret of the Levant, is of course the predominance of trade making the world go round and indeed these cities to function. And so deals were more important than ideals, and I was attracted to that spirit, being temperamentally averse to nationalism or idealism or wars for principles or ideologies. And I think thirdly, the Levant has an answer to some of the problems of today. How do you get people to live together of different religions? The problem of migration. It shows it has been possible in the past. The way people write about 19th century Istanbul or 20th century Alexandria or Beirut before 1975 as the best time of their lives, or Aleppo before 2012. And maybe these cities have an answer to some of the problems of today, which we've seen in recent riots in France, England and America. And I think the Levant is also interesting because it shows the importance of cities, of the ideology of cities and cities as identities, the way many people thought of themselves as primarily from Salonika or Smyrna or Aleppo, rather than being a Greek or Turkish or Syrian. And it's a fundamental conflict in culture and politics, the tension between port cities and the inland. I would say the history of the Levant shows that the hinterland always bites back. It's the struggle between Smyrna and Anatolia, which had a horrific resolution in 1922, between Aleppo and the rest of Syria, between Beirut and the rest of Syria, which was one of the main driving forces of the conflict in Beirut after 1975, was envy of the rich port city from the hinterland. The same with Alexandria, and it is a much more general conflict than we imagine. Look at the electoral map of America showing the coasts, California and New York against the Midwest, or the conflict between Dubai and the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, or Bombay and India, or Hong Kong and Shanghai and China. This relatively free, enterprising, independent, challenging, critical spirit of the port cities has always attracted me. That is one reason why I've written about them. and many people never get over the loss of their city, whether it's St. Petersburg or Odessa or Alexandria or Hong Kong, and they still feel loyal to that city even when they're living in other countries. So maybe cities are a endlessly rewarding, fascinating and provoking subject for societies, conferences, books, and maybe they should be taken more seriously as a driving force in history. We've been so dominated by nation states that we have missed the fact that a lot of what is called French culture is in fact Paris culture. And I think the conflict between London and England and Paris and France is something that is going on today as we speak, and it helps explain a lot that is happening in the two countries. Thank you very much. And the Levant has a particular attraction for me. My other great interest is French history, the history of the French court and monarchy. And of course the Levant is partly a product of the alliance between the Ottoman Empire and France, which lasted from the 16th century to the 20th. It was one of the very few fixed points in European diplomacy, and it led, or it helped, to the spread of French culture in the Levant. So French became the second language of people like Mustafa Kemal or the poet Safaris and many, many others. Hundreds of thousands of people were educated in French religious and Jewish and secular schools for 100 years after 1860. And when I asked an old lady, Leila Duran, what Istanbul was like before 1914, which she could remember, her answer to me was, it was French. It was all French. Everyone spoke French. And this again is an aspect which has been long forgotten, but is remembered in the wonderful work of the Levantine Heritage Foundation, which aims to rethink the history of the Eastern Mediterranean and to show its varied, polyglot, multifaceted aspects. We can't understand Mustafa Kemal himself, the great nationalist or the alleged nationalist, without understanding his Salonika background, his education at an Ottoman school, partly in the military school later. He would learn French, and he learned French later in the Ottoman army. He visited Paris and France on maneuvers before 1914, and he knew well the secular and laïc ideology of the Third Republic, which he studied in books and which he later and extremely successfully or lastingly imposed on Turkey itself.
Okay.
So I urge everyone who wants to get away from national history and national boundaries and to understand what really made people and companies and cities work to join the Levantine Heritage Foundation.